Hello, tipsters. This is Melissa Morgan. I'm the host of Just the Tip-sters, true crime podcast, because people are awful and they kill each other. Tipsters, this is Melissa Morgan, the host of Just the Tip-sters, true crime podcast. Have you ever wanted to kill anyone? Hey, tipsters. My name's Melissa Morgan, and I'm the host of Just the Tip-sters, true crime podcast, America's favorite true crime podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcast. I don't know where you can find us. How about that? Just find us and listen, and you'll really like it. Is that okay?
Just the Tip-sters with Melissa Morgan is actually available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, rate, review. You'll be glad you did.
Ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between, outside, time travelers, interdimensional creatures, and extraterrestrial listeners, welcome to another mini-sode of No Better Death. Each episode we talk about dead shit. I am your host, Sick Grayson, but I'm guessing if you're here, you already knew that. You know, I always bill this show as a history podcast, not a true crime podcast. True crime adjacent, yes. Death and crime are often related, but ultimately, I consider this show to be morbid history. And in America, it doesn't get much more historical than the colonial period, or as some might call it, the Colonel period. I worked at a KFC for a few years, and you'd be surprised how many people can't read the word Colonel and say colonial instead. Can I get the 3 colonial strip meal? Fucking dumbasses. And we wonder how Trump got to be president and how everybody thinks what he's saying is right. These motherfuckers can't tell the difference between colonel and colonial. Anyway, colonial times. That's right, we're going old school, America. Today we're talking about Bathsheba Ruggles Spooner, and that is a fucking name, isn't it? So many options to go with, but her parents, man, you gotta really stand firm on that decision. I remember when my daughter was gonna be born and my wife and I were trying to think of girl names. I was like, Jezebel, Zelda, Bathsheba never stuck in my head. Maybe we would have picked that one had I thought of it. That is certainly a strong name, though. So who is Bathsheba Ruggles Spooner? She is the first woman to be executed in America post-Declaration of Independence. But if you ask me, before the Declaration, we weren't technically America, right? So wouldn't she be the first woman to be executed in America, period? Now, there is some misinformation out there. Some sources will tell you that Mary Surratt was the first woman executed in America. This is false. She was executed like 90 years after Bathsheba. Surratt was the first woman to be executed by the United States government for her supposed role in the assassination of President Lincoln. Bathsheba Spooner was executed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Also of note in this case, depending on when you believe life begins, this execution could be considered a twofer, but we'll get to that. So who the fuck was Bathsheba Ruggles Spooner? God, Ruggles. Bathsheba Ruggles was the daughter of Brigadier General Timothy Ruggles, a 5th-generation New World lawyer, so this family is OG Americans who had served as Chief Justice of Court of Common Pleas in Worcester. Is it Worcester? I know one of y'all motherfuckers live. Chris, you live up there, right? Is it Worcester? Worcester, Massachusetts? Ruggles refused to sign the Stamp Act protest while serving as a Massachusetts representative. He was an avowed loyalist, or Tory, who threatened to raise an army to protect his and other loyalist farms and livestock against attacks by revolutionary forces. This family was pro-Britain. He owned a 400-acre farm, so a lot to protect there, and he thought the Stamp Act was treasonous and would start a revolution against the crown. This stance, in a new world full of those who wanted to separate from Great Britain, caused the Ruggles' reputation to plummet. In 1775, he joined forces with the British Army in Boston and was eventually put on a list of traitors. Wow, did he back the wrong pony on this one, right? America, fuck yeah, we beat an army that took 3 months to get here. And Timothy's story could probably fill a book. just by itself before we even get to his daughter. Just a little background on her family there. Enough about him. We get the gist. The Ruggles were a bourgeois family that people started to despise because they didn't want to break from England. No info on a mom. There were at least 3 sisters and 3 brothers, maybe more. Really not much info on Bathsheba at all, other than she was beautiful, intelligent, and high-spirited with passions that had never been properly restrained. Timothy entered his daughter into an arranged marriage. Well, that never works. Bathsheba Ruggles married Joshua Spooner on January 15, 1766. He was a well-to-do Brookfield farmer, the son of a wealthy Boston merchant. The couple lived in relative affluence, and that means ballin', in a 2-story house in Brookfield. Their first child was born April 1767. 3 more children were born between 1770 and 1775. Although the second son, John, died a few weeks after his birth. So arranged marriage or not, they were getting their fuck on. The husband was later described as a drunk, abusive man incapable of managing household affairs and for whom his wife developed an utter aversion. Then why does she keep fucking him then, huh? Yeah, I know, it's probably an uninformed dude question, and the realistic answer was probably something like, so she didn't get her face bashed in. I get it. So an abusive arranged marriage with way too many kids for this lady to care for. Sounds pretty shitty. Sounds stressful. Sounds like the perfect conditions to drive someone to have an affair. In the spring of 1777, 16-year-old Ezra Ross, a soldier in the Continental Army who had already served for a year in the Revolutionary War in a regiment under George Washington himself. Man, at 16. You can't even expect a 16-year-old to find the car in a parking lot nowadays, but back then, 16 was a grown-ass man ready to drink, fuck, kill, and die, son. I mean, at 16, he'd already put in a year. That means he was doing this shit at 15. Anyway, Ezra fell ill en route to his home in Linebrook, which was a village in Ipswich, Massachusetts, where that Summer of '84 flick took place, and Bathsheba nursed him back to health. No explanation on how they met, weirdly. On his travels to and from Army service, he visited the Spooner home in July and December 1777. So he kept coming back. Like, he just, through his travels, he met this family, he'd stop in and see how they were doing or whatever. On the latter occasion, December 1777, he stayed into the new year and even traveled with Joshua Spooner on business trips and, of course, had an affair with Bathsheba. You never shit where you eat, dude. Not a good idea. She became pregnant around mid-January and began urging Ezra, to kill her husband. It has been generally assumed that Ezra Ross was the father of this child, but it can't be known with certainty. There are suggestions in the records that Bathsheba may have had other lovers. In February 1778, Ezra accompanied Joshua Spooner on an extended trip to Princeton, Massachusetts. He brought along a bottle of nitric acid given to him by Bathsheba, which he planned to use to poison Spooner. Ezra backed out of the plan and returned directly to his Linebrook home. Yeah, this is like that part in Wayne's World when Kim Basinger tries to talk Garth into killing her husband and he just goes, ew, and he tosses the gun into the bushes and goes home. While Ezra Ross and Joshua Spooner were in Princeton, Bathsheba invited 2 runaway British soldiers, escaped prisoners of war Private Williams Brooks and Sergeant James Buchanan, to stay at the Spooner home and discussed ideas for killing her husband with them, because of course that's what you do. You invite strangers into your home and immediately start discussing killing your husband that they've never met. When Joshua Spooner returned home, she recruited them to assist her. She also wrote to Ezra to inform him of these developments, because why the fuck not leave a paper trail, dumbass? And he returned to Brookfield on February 28th. When Spooner returned home drunk from a local tavern the following evening, Brooks attacked, beat, and strangled him. When he was either dead or unconscious, Buchanan and Ezra helped to push him head down into the Spooner's well. Bathsheba distributed paper money from her husband's lockbox and articles of his clothing to the 3 men, who then took one of the Spooner horses to Worcester, 14 miles away. Brooks and Buchanan spent the remainder of the night drinking, and the next morning Brooks showed off Joshua Spooner's silver shoe buckles engraved with his initials, because that's what you do. This sounds like just a bunch of stupidity running rampant. Once the murder was discovered, which it was because this guy was talking about how he was wearing a dead dude's clothes, the three men were arrested in Worcester within 24 hours. When Ross was discovered hiding in the attic of a tavern, he asked for a confessor. The trio implicated Bathsheba Spooner and two servants in the household, Sarah Stratton and Alexander Cummings. Brooks was charged with the assault on Joshua Spooner, Buchanan and Ezra with aiding and abetting in the murder, and Bathsheba Spooner with inciting, abetting, and procuring the manner and form of the murder. All were arraigned and pleaded not guilty. Now, this was the first capital murder case in the United States. Robert T. Payne, later the first Attorney General of Massachusetts, prosecuted the case. The prosecution presented many neighbors and acquaintances who testified both to the family relationships between Joshua Spooner and his wife and to the events on the night of the murder. Sarah Stratton and Alexander Cummings, who it is thought must have been aware of the plan and may have assisted in it, testified for the prosecution, presumably in return for a grant of immunity. Levi Lincoln, a young Worcester attorney who would later become U.S. Attorney General under Thomas Jefferson, was assigned to defend the four accused. He had a difficult task, as the three men had signed written confessions. He apparently presented no witnesses. There was little he could do for Brooks or Buchanan, but he was more eloquent on behalf of Ezra and Bathsheba. He tried to persuade the jury that Ezra had no designs to harm Joshua Spooner and was unaware of the plan until a few hours before it was carried out. He had not physically assisted in the murder and had appeared to favor it in order to keep on terms with his lover. Of Bathsheba, he said that there is the best evidence of a disordered mind that the nature of the thing will admit of. Many of her actions before and after the murder were irrational. No plan had been formed for the murder itself or to conceal it, or for the perpetrators to escape. So, he still had knowledge of what was going to happen and opted out not to tell anyone, going along with it so this chick will keep screwing him. But that doesn't equal innocence. And then they just tried to say that what did they used to call it? Hysteria? She had lady hysteria. This chick was prone to catching the vapors and acting wrong. The trial took 16 hours. All were found guilty the next day and sentenced to death, with the execution set for June 4th, 1778. Ezra's aged parents submitted an appeal to save his life. At the first instance of bloodshed, they had sent 5 sons to fight for the American cause. 4 sons fought at Bunker Hill, and 3, including Ezra, had marched southwards with General Washington. One of their sons was killed in battle. Ross family claimed that their boy, far from the security and guidance of his family, was seduced by a lewd and artful woman to take part in the gruesome murder. The requested appeal would not be granted, so despite this family sending how many men to help out in the war, they were told to go fuck themselves. And probably with good reason. I mean, the second she was like, hey, you should poison him on that trip, this guy should have gone to the cops or whatever cop-like figures there were back then and let them know then. He would have still been alive. He could have got to live his whole life. But no, now he's going to die for it. Spooner petitioned for a postponement, citing her pregnancy. Remember, she's pregnant right now. We forgot all about that. Based on common law principle that protected the life of a fetus if it had quickened, which means is moving around inside the stomach. I guess that's when colonial Americans thought life began, and it makes a lot more sense than what some people believe today, because if you happen to have technically gotten pregnant last night, you do not have a baby crawling around inside you this morning. But that's going to get off on a tangent. I know some of y'all don't want to hear from me, but maybe fuck a few states in the South that are telling ladies what they can and can't do with their bodies. Spooner was examined by a panel of 12 women and 2 male midwives. All swore that she was not quick with child. When Spooner and her confessor, the Reverend Thaddeus McCarty, protested the report, 4 of the examiners, joined by another midwife and Spooner's brother-in-law, Dr. John Green, conducted a second examination and supported the claim of pregnancy. The court did not accept those findings. On the appointed day, an immense throng of people, numbering 5,000 coming from near and far, assembled in Worcester to witness the hanging of the 4 murderers. Escorted by an armed guard of 100 men, the prisoners were brought out by cart to the hanging place, close to the courthouse where Bathsheba's father, Timothy Ruggles, had served as Chief Justice. After the 3 men were hanged, the rope was placed around Bathsheba's neck. With her face covered, she acknowledged her guilt. Taking the Sheriff William Greenleaf by the hand, she said, "My dear sir, I am ready. In a little time I expect to be in bliss, and but a few years must elapse when I hope I shall see you and my other friends." And she was hanged until dead. Post-mortem examination performed at Spooner's request. I assume that request was made before she died, as it would have been kind of hard to request it after the fact, showed that she was pregnant with, quote, "a perfect male fetus of the growth of 5 months." This was not a new baby. This thing should have been moving around. Her body was claimed by her sister Mary Ruggles, wife of Dr. John... Okay, so that's where brother-in-law comes in. Her sister, Mary Ruggles Green, was married to Dr. John Green, so it wasn't her husband's brother, it was her sister's brother. And she was buried in an unmarked grave on the Green Estate, which today is the site of Green Hill Park in Worcester, Massachusetts. And as we all know from the documentary Poltergeist, when you build things where bodies are buried, you get hauntings, so it's fairly safe to assume Green Hill Park is haunted by the ghost of Bathsheba Spooner and like a third of a ghost for the fetus. So he's probably like one of those little orbs, not a full ghost. It's been argued that Bathsheba bore the brunt of the community's hostility towards her father for his devotion to the Loyalist cause. In her book, Murdered by His Wife, Deborah Navas points out that the Deputy Secretary of the Council of Massachusetts, who signed the final warrant for the execution, was not only Joshua Spooner's stepbrother, but also a member of a small group of patriots who all pursued a vendetta against Brigadier General Timothy Ruggles. Also unresolved are the issues of Bathsheba's personality and motivation. It can probably never be known whether she was a cold-blooded murderer, or whether circumstances not fully understood caused her to become mentally deranged. Nor is it known how she was able to persuade others to assist her in such a foolish and doomed scheme, though it's suspected that money, sex, and clothing were offered. I've seen enough ID and Snapped and true crime shit to know that typically when a dude or multiple dudes do some dumb shit for a woman, like killing her husband, it's because they're either getting sex or they're hoping to get sex. That's just reality and will continue until guys get smarter. The CBS radio program Crime Classics dramatized the case in an episode entitled The Crime of Bathsheba Spooner that aired on June 15, 1953, and was also featured in an episode of Deadly Women, which I think was the sequel to Designing Women, where Delta Burke was like, "Fuck this shit, we're robbing banks, bitches." Bitches with a Z, because that's cooler than an S. Bathsheba's dad was in New York when she was hanged, and he and the three brothers would go on to be given 1,000 acres in Canada by the British government for their loyalty, and it sounds like they were, for all intents and purposes, put in charge of Nova Scotia. And that is the story of Bathsheba Ruggles Spooner, the first woman executed in America proper. What did we learn? Don't listen to a lady when she asks you to kill her husband. If it's so fucking bad at home, she can do it herself and then produce self-defense evidence when it goes to court. Don't ruin your life trying to get laid. It happens every day. People get shit twisted trying to get into someone's panties or getting mad that someone else got into said panties, does some dumb shit, and goes to prison or the electric chair for it. Just do you. Don't get caught up in this kind of shit. But if you're gonna do it, maybe don't go around town showing everyone that you're wearing the dead guy's clothes. Surprisingly, that also happens all the time. People kill someone and then just go around their neighborhood and be like, "Hey, you want to hear a cool story? I killed that dude. You know that dude that died the other day? That was me." Someone's going to call the cops. Shut the fuck up. A trial hinges on burden of proof. If you provide proof, like a confession to 50 people in a bar, there is no longer a burden and you will die. They will execute you. Like, follow, subscribe, share wherever you do those things. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email, whatever, whenever, wherever. Just look up No Better Death and you will find the show there. Please leave an iTunes review and tell your friends. Still have the contest going on. If you'd like to win some sweet, sweet dirt from BTK's backyard, go to iTunes between July 15th and August 15th. Leave a review. You're automatically entered, and one lucky winner will get the thing to be won. If there's a story you want me to cover, something you want to share with all the death nerds out there, or maybe you just want to tell me how bad I suck at this, let me know and I'll get it on the show for you. I am sick. No, I won't kill your husband for you, Grayson. Until next time, try not to die.